All right, we should be live at that point. Sorry, Mario. That was like 30 seconds late, Morgan. I apologize.
Slacking.
I know. You every time I see you, I think let's be on exactly on time now. So you really raised the bar for us.
It seems like I've shell shocked you.
You really have, yeah. So you should check this out. So I got a box. I don't know if you can see this here. I'll go to just me for a second here. Because this is what I'm supposed to do when someone sends me a great big box like this. Can we see that? Yep.
Yeah.
So this is to promote the new Einstein science series called Genius. I'm not being paid for this. They just sent me a great big box, which, says that I'm a genius. Which, how can I resist that? And then it's got a little book, and then and it's got these really cool kind of end things for bookends. I don't know what books are anymore, but apparently people still have them. And then it came with the screener, and here's the cool part. And this had us totally perplexed. So we got this. It says screener enclosed, right? So I can watch the show in advance. And then it had this thing. And we're like, this is really cool, but how is there a screener in here?
Is it a USB drive?
It's a USB drive, yeah. So you pop it open, and then it's got the USB drive. And so there's 2 episodes, and I can, it says screener, no one else can see it. But anyway, and the fact that National Geographic is doing an episode or a whole series on a scientist, and if this goes well, they'll do series on other scientists. That's a good thing. So I'm 100%. I am happy to help them promote this. I haven't watched the episodes yet, but I will.
Just another day of Fraser reminding us how much cooler he is than the rest of us.
Yeah. Make sure that's really clear. Morgan, you may be on your way to a PhD in planetary astronomy, but I'm a genius. So, just
can't compete with that.
Just put you in your place. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna say hi to a bunch of people. Hello to Adam Synergy, Alex Economou, Aaron C, Arnold Post, boy, Ben Gizu Ozaiden, Bill K, Burt Klankar, Brian Yoko, Chris Lindberg, Connor Lennon, David Dunn, David Hall, David Joseph Wesley. David, I just visited David Joseph Wesley in Los Angeles, and we hung out and composed music together. It was super fun. In that he's got a working theremin, and we played it. It was cool. Ajizel Sabarin, Graham Ash, Granville White, Guido Bibra, H. Roll, Henrik Bo Anderson, High Champ 1, James Doyle, James Haney, Jerry Ruprecht, John Hamilton, John Suffield, Larry Beckham, Malcolm Bond, Marco Patayan, Michael Jobin, Nancy Graziano, Neil Hutchinson, Nichols of the Yard, Noah Vasquez, Paul Gracie, Peter Schultz, Pyro Nitro, Quickie Koala, Rinstro, Rick Schwartz, Ronald McCoy. Wow, you're all saying hi. Thomas Traniker, Tom Van Scotter, and Zap Fan. I say this every week, but I'm like, I don't know how long we can keep this rolling, but I'm ready to keep saying hi. Yeah, sorry about last week. I went on a trip down the coast of the West. So we drove with the kids from Vancouver Island here all the way down the West Coast, went through Portland and Seattle and San Francisco and Los Angeles, hung out in person with Amy Shira Title and Ian O'Neill, dropped by a bunch of other places as well. So there's some interesting collaborations coming down the pike. I guess we should move towards actually doing this episode. So all of the stuff that you saw is all going to disappear, gone forever. Oh, one other thing is I got a new microphone. So here it is here. And it is a... I don't have the box around. Oh, yeah, here we go. It's a large diagram dynamic microphone. It's not the fanciest one, but it's better than what I've got than the USB stuff. So I haven't even really kind of optimized the way it's configured. So if it sounds terrible or if I sound differently loud from everybody else, please let me know. I always enjoy hearing your feedback as I tweak knobs and dials. And I've got actual knobs and dials that I can tweak now. So that's it. Let's get on with the show. Unless anyone has any reason to not begin. All right. Speaker view, Morgan time. No, I didn't visit tomorrow. I should. Oh, too many people. Oh well. All right, here we go. Hello everyone and welcome to the Weekly Space Hangout for Friday, March 31st, 2017. I'm Fraser Cain, publisher of Zooniverse Today. This week, it's going to be human space exploration. We're going to be talking about a reused rocket, the interior of the Blue Origin's machine, and what's happening with the exploration of Mars. Joining us this week, we've got one of our regular crew. That's, of course, the stalwart Morgan Renberg, who is going to be here to... so it's going to be the Fraser and Morgan show. Morgan.
Hey, Fraser. Happy Friday.
Where are you? There you are. Awesome. Which is good. We're going to chat about these stories in great depth. We'll have lots of time for questions. And if we run out of things to talk about, we've still got time. Go ahead and just prepare really tough zingers for Morgan. And I think that'll be awesome. I love it. Remember, zingers. If you need to go and call in a friend, research something really hard, prep your zingers. If I see them in the chat, I'll throw them at Morgan. We'll have a really good time. All right. Now, we've got a whole pile of guests, though. So I'm going to hand this over and introduce Timothy Spuck, and he's going to sort of introduce the rest of his team. Timothy, welcome to the Weekly Space Hangout.
Hey, thanks, Fraser. We're really happy to be here. It's an exciting project, and looking forward to talking about it.
All right, so why don't you give people sort of the short version of who you are, what you do, and what brings you to the Weekly Space Hangout this week?
Okay, yeah, so I'm the STEM Education Development Officer for Associated Universities Incorporated, and AUI, that's the management organization for the National Radio Astronomy Observatories and the Green Bank Observatory, and now the Long Baseline Array Observatory as well. And so what brings us to the show is something called Innovators Developing Accessible Tools for Astronomy. And this is a multi-institutional collaboration between AUI, Yerkes Observatory, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, TURC up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And basically the program or the project brings together high school students, blind and visually impaired, fully sighted students, their teachers, software engineers and developers, professional astronomers, astronomy educators to design and develop a fully accessible or a blind and visually impaired accessible software that basically gives an opportunity for blind students to explore the universe. So when we're done with this project, what will be possible is for a blind and visually impaired high school student to go online, access the software, access the global network of telescopes via Skynet, and then access the data they've collected, go ahead and analyze the data without the assistance of a sighted individual. And so that's a big project. It's complicated, and that's why we have an excellent team of experts from across the U.S.
Right, and I was about to ask you now, so why don't you go ahead and introduce the rest of your team members who are joining us today?
Okay, well, first of all, I think what I'll do is I'll just let them go ahead and do a brief for themselves and what they're doing with the project. And Kate at Yerkes Observatory, do you want to start off?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kathryn Meredith, and I'm the Education Director here at Yerkes Observatory. I've been here for about 15 years part-time, just came on as Education Director about a year and a half ago, And we're continuing this project as a continuation of a previous project called Skynet Junior Scholars, which was providing the entry point for students online to access the Skynet Robotic Telescope Network.
Do you have any concern about the name of the Skynet Robotic Telescope? Is this the...
I take no responsibility for that whatsoever.
Yeah.
The server for this project is called the Terminator, and I use my comments there.
All right. Is it like some kind of backronym, or you just went with that name from?
No, they developed this before I even came on the scene, and
Right.
they didn't check with me.
Now the Yerkes Observatory, that's out of Chicago, right?
Yep, University of Chicago. We're about 75 miles north of Chicago, in Wisconsin.
Right on.
Yeah, you'll notice, Fraser, that the folks from UNC, from Skynet, of course, are not here. So we don't know what they're doing with the servers right now. It could be taking over the world or something.
Well, obviously the key is you claim the name and for a much more useful purpose, and then when the computer uprising shows up, the name's already taken, so they have to give up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They have to come up with something else.
Yeah.
So Jim Hammerman from Turk, do you want to go ahead and chat next?
Sure. So I'm Jim Hammerman. I direct the STEM Education Evaluation Center at Turk, which is a STEM research and development company in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And for this project, I'm responsible for the education research we're doing. We really want to learn a lot about what kids learn about astronomy and about computing and how they go together, and also about their attitudes and their sense of efficacy. I just wanted to say I'm really delighted to be doing this project. As a kid, I was really interested in astronomy and being an astronomer, and then all of that kind of went by the wayside as I went into education research. And so to have a chance to be doing astronomy again is very, very exciting.
Okay, and speaking of exciting people, Andy Stefik from University of Nevada, Las Vegas.
Hi, my name is Andreas Stefik. Most people just call me by my last name for whatever reason. That's Stefik. I'm a computer scientist by trade. I invent computer programming languages. One of the reasons why I'm on this particular project is because around 2009 or 10 or so, I invented a variety of technologies that make it a little bit easier for blind and visually impaired people to write software. So the idea is basically, as part of IDATA, my role in the project is trying to make it so that kids can write like computational astronomy algorithms on their own so that they can get information out of images, which would then be accessible to them.
Right. Okay, so I think the sort of my main question, and I'm sure you get this one a lot, is just that astronomy, especially looking through a telescope, is such a visual experience. I mean, the whole point is that you're looking at the sky with your eyeballs. What is the process to translate or to make that experience accessible to people who have visual impairment issues?
I'll go ahead and chime in here real quick, and then others might have something to say. But technically, Fraser, we're all starting off in astronomy. One of the interesting things is that we all start off blind. Really, the stuff we see in these images is just data, and we choose to visualize it. So if you think about the astronomical images, the great images that Hubble's produced, or the other, for research purposes, we don't go out and look up with our eyes and see that stuff. We can look through a telescope and we can see some things, but for the most part, astronomy today is computationally based. And so thus the project here looking at computing in astronomy, and basically kind of approaching it from the perspective, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, well, how many is a song worth? Or how many is touch worth? Because really we have other physical senses in which we can explore the universe, and it's not just our eyeballs. And so because we've chosen to kind of visualize astronomical data, that doesn't mean that's the only way to explore it. So.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll chime in from the teacher educator standpoint, is that Here at Yerkes, we've been trying to do astronomy with blind and visually impaired and deaf and hard of hearing students for many years. And we have we're fortunate to be very close to the Wisconsin School for the Blind and the Wisconsin School for the Deaf, and they've been awesome partners. And we find that the same thing that draws everybody to astronomy draws those kids as well. They know about, they've heard about these things. Many students have some visual acuity, and they take advantage of every bit of it to take a look through telescopes when they can. There's super high contrast on simple objects like Saturn, and there's nothing better than your first view of Saturn. So our challenge has been how to make that more accessible. And for students who are completely blind, when you're just doing an observing session, there's lots of educational content in there that you want to get a hold of, like what's distance and scale and structure and what are these things? And all those questions have to start in our mind, and then we go find ways to explore them. So we're just extending that and trying to invent new stuff. And Andy's got the market cornered on our inventions these days.
Yeah, so on a technical perspective, there's quite a few technologies that make it possible for blind and visually impaired to do activities that people wouldn't think about. So for example, one of the technologies that we use in the lab is called the Quorum programming language. And it's basically just a programming language. But here's the thing. Oftentimes when people use programming languages, there's all sorts of stuff that comes out in audio. So like, for example, if you're using a language like Java, you might say, int A equals A minus B semicolon. But that comes out in audio. And a lot of the text and symbols and things like that, you have to kind of adjust to make it easier to understand. So for example, for left paren, int I equals 0 semicolon, I less than 10 semicolon, I plus plus right paren left brace. It's a little harder to understand than something in Quorum like repeat 10 times.
Yep.
But the thing is when you're on the web, there's other technologies where you can force the browsers to have audio come out. So for example, we've got technologies internally that can allow a blind person to create their own 3D computer games. We've got technologies internally to allow students to do robotics blind using Legos so they can do it on teams. So when Tim and Kate and these people asked me to try to help them invent technologies to make astronomy accessible, it was kind of a no-brainer. It sounded about like one of the coolest pitches I've ever received. So we don't know exactly, but the goal is to just wrap that into a lot of the existing tech we know exists and try to figure it out.
I think that's, as a person who is sighted, I can't even imagine sort of what it would be like to try to sort of experience that day. Like debugging a computer program, that would just be misery, as you said. Oh, did I miss the semicolon at the end of that line? So I can see that it's almost like if you can change your paradigm for how you actually test and debug and look at what you're looking at in some other way, as opposed to like literally having the characters read out to you. That would be misery. So how many people do you have in the program? How do people get involved in it?
Kate, do you want to go ahead and talk about that?
Okay, so right now we're just getting to the point that we're recruiting teachers and students. So we have 2 different levels of engagement in this process, and it all centers around student group leaders who are going to spend a lot of time here at the observatory learning about user-centered design process, because it's really up to us and our team to learn how it is they want to best perceive this material. Well, how do they want to best encounter science? We don't want to approach this as we're just going to solve the problem that it's not accessible. We're going beyond that. We want to say, how do you want to encounter astronomical data? And so in order to do that, we've got a core team of 20 students that are going to be within 75 miles of Yerkes Observatory, and they're going to work with their teachers and our whole team, and we're going to have interns that go out and visit them at their schools, and they're going to go through a process of user-centered design. They're going to work with other students at their schools and shoot out challenges to the whole nation. So we've got even more students beyond that. Another 20 teachers and another 100 students across the US are going to be participating in this. And they're all going to funnel information, and we're going to do a really good job of making it really clear and comprehensible so we don't drive Andy and the Skynet programmers crazy but we're going to give them all sorts of ideas, and we're going to test out and see how they fly.
So Fraser, just to follow up on what Kate said there about participation. Right now, we're in the process of recruiting teachers. So we'll be selecting 10 teachers from within a 75-mile radius of Yerkes Observatory. We'll be selecting another 10 teachers that are distributed nationally or across U.S. territories. So that application, I believe the deadline for that is April 23rd. And if you go online, or if you just simply contact Kate or I via email, we'll be happy to point you in that direction to go ahead and apply. But so we're selecting high school teachers that are teaching physics, astronomy, computing science, that have access or have somebody they could work with that might be able to tap into the blind and visually impaired communities.
How well are the various sciences represented in this situation? I mean, is astronomy one of the last to get on board in being able to really support the needs of visually impaired, or biology, chemistry? Like, where does science education, STEM, sort of stand in this field right now?
That's a great question. I've never actually thought about it from that perspective before. Like, where are each of the scientific disciplines at? You'd think that actually a discipline like computer science would be really far along, right? Because, of course, computer scientists invented computer science, right? But actually, in fact, even in our discipline, there's huge challenges. So, for example, I think it was January, the Obama administration announced this movement called Computer Science for All. I'm not sure if you've heard of that or not, but
no.
The idea is basically there's a number of states now that are trying to put computer science into K through 12. The idea being that if the next generation of students has more computational sort of literacy, then it might help biologists doing bioinformatics or astronomers doing like image processing or anything, right? But the thing is it turns out almost every single initiative out there, and they have various names, is actually not blind accessible, even in a field that's dedicated to computer science. So I think that I couldn't give you a straight answer across the board where each discipline is at, but I would say in every discipline, there's probably pockets where it's okay and pockets where it's maybe not. So it's a process. It's hard. It's a hard problem in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I think from what I've seen out there, there are very limited resources that in the scientific community that make science or STEM-related fields accessible to these populations.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know that sort of in a lot of the educational folks have been dealing with sort of the new proposed changes to the budget. A lot of education stuff has been slashed. NASA education stuff looks like it's going to get slashed from the budget. This is all still sort of in the works. Is any of this going to impact the work that you guys are doing?
No, I mean, at this point, we've been funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation. Now, certainly, there's always an outside chance that you can experience a budget cut, but it's not something that we are anticipating with the project.
Right. Good. Well, so, I mean, so you mentioned right now, like, you've got a bunch of teachers that are in the near the observatory and their students, but I'm sure there's a lot of communities that this would be well served by this kind of a program. So are there plans to roll this out farther across the country?
Yeah, I can take that. So Skynet Junior Scholars and the Skynet systems on the web. So the idea is we make all of this very accessible via the web so that you don't have to download anything at your school, that you can run all of this on the web. And so that once we get that all rolled out and running smoothly, the idea is that it should be scalable.
And I think the other thing to really point out here is that during the process here, for example, in the fall, the students and teachers, participants that are directly involved with the project, they're going to be conducting a needs assessment, talking to people who are from the blind and visually impaired communities, talking to individuals who are familiar with astronomy and astronomy software, who use it, And so there'll be, during this needs assessment, there'll be an opportunity for anybody. Maybe you're not a teacher. Maybe you're just an amateur astronomer. Maybe you're somebody else that's just interested in helping out. Where during that needs assessment and prototype testing and things like that throughout the project, there will be those opportunities for outside individuals to get involved and to provide input for this project, because it is very complicated. And that is something that we realize getting information from as many people as we can is critical.
So I got a couple of questions from some of the viewers here. This one comes from Malcolm Bond. Can I have a haptic star map? Which I think would be wonderful.
Yeah, we can make all sorts of tactile stuff, but
well, Andy and I were talking about this at a meeting earlier this week about some interesting ideas and interesting technologies that are sort of coming out.
Yeah, so it's complicated. So I actually have another National Science Foundation project to look at translating scientific content and visualization into what are called vibrotactile tablets. All that basically means is you got a tablet with a little vibration unit and you control it to try to provide information. But of course, there's limits, right? Like, just because you got a vibration unit doesn't mean that all of a sudden magically you understand all the content. So the real question with a lot of these technologies like haptics or sound is what kind of information can they provide? Yeah. What are the pros and cons? What are the limitations and benefits? So I think that there's people thinking about it, but it's not quite on the iPhone yet, I don't think.
Right.
And this is one of the areas that we're really relying on Jim's team for too, is to carefully watch what's going on and make assessments about what's working and what's not.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good opportunity, because I want to have Jim chat here just a minute in particular, because something that's a very critical component, we're talking about the invention of the technology and stuff that we're going to be doing, but a real critical component here is the educational research that's going to happen and what we're going to learn about from the participants about engaging students in this sort of a process, because that knowledge is also transferable then to other learning environments. And so, Jim, do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think this project is really interesting in so many different ways. I know that, partly on the point of learning sort of how you would make sense of other kinds of representations, we also have to learn how to make sense of visual representations of the data. And so kind of thinking about, is it, what are the affordances? What are the things that make it easy or hard to learn about visual representations, and what about other kinds of representations is one piece of it. We're really excited about the idea that computation and learning how to sort of take charge of computing can actually give access. And that's empowering, and it also sort of opens up other fields and other possibilities for students. They see that if they can actually make software that lets kids with visual impairments do astronomy, they can probably do anything. And so we're really interested in how they feel about themselves and about the possibilities of making the world a place that's accessible and workable for a range of students.
I mean, I think there's a lot of benefits, right, to having to sort of think about how someone who necessarily can't see the data can digest it, that you'll come up with other ideas, other representations, visualizations, things like that, and then bring that back, even for the people who are sighted, that you're making these discoveries and thoughts about the way that you can present this material, and it's going to have use across the board. So it's like you're thinking outside the box, right?
Yeah, and actually one of the things we're interested in, we don't know if this is going to really happen, is that even for kids who can see the visual images, that having access to auditory representations of the same data at the same time may actually give different insights. Right. And so if you can imagine sort of hearing a spiral galaxy, around your head, and how that's different from hearing a globular cluster, then actually you might get a better sense about what's going on with these different astronomical objects.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Well, we got to wrap this up. I just wanted to give you a chance to sort of let people know where they can find out more if they want to, participate in the project, if they want to support it, if they want to just watch from afar. What can they do?
Well, let me go ahead and take that. Since I have probably one of the shortest email addresses, they can just email tspuck@aui.edu.
Perfect.
So,
is there, I mean, a publicly, like a website would be great. Is there a project page out there they can follow?
Yes, we do have a project page. I believe we have one that can be linked from Yerkes Observatory and one coming online very soon that can be linked from the AUI.edu website.
So go to the Yerkes Observatory and there'll be some links from there.
YerkesEducationOutreach.org.
That sounds perfect.
Or I see some people asking about accessible programming in general in the chat. And so if you want to hear more about that, there's 2 sites that you can go to. One is quorumlanguage.com, which is our accessible programming language technologies. And the second one is there's a group called Access CS for All. And this has a heck of a lot of information about accessible programming. And you can just Google Access CS for All and you'll find it.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. That was fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to seeing. I mean, I already know a couple of people that are in this field who could benefit from some of the advancements that you're making. So I look forward to the results, and good luck with the project.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Great
All right.
to be here.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Morgan.
Yes, let's do some spaceflight.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, this is probably going to be one of the most historic days in the Weekly Space Hangout. I mean, it was one of the biggest stories in human spaceflight that we have probably ever covered, I think.
Yeah, this is an incredible week to talk about human spaceflight in general. And of course, the story that has to lead us off here is the culmination of SpaceX's reusable Falcon 9 dream. And so we've been talking now for years about the steps that SpaceX has been taking to achieve this idea of being able to launch, land rockets and reuse them continuously to dramatically lower the cost. And then for the last 18 months or so, they've been landing them one after another. They have a whole hangar full of these first stage Falcon 9s that either touch down on drone ships in the Atlantic or the Pacific, or on land down in Cape Canaveral. But yesterday was the first time that they successfully reflew one of those rockets that had previously been to space. And this is the first time in history that a rocket that put a payload into Earth orbit was able to fly more than one time.
I'm just queuing up here. Let's see if we can get Elon Musk to we'll get a shot of Elon Musk here. Hold on a second here.
Yeah, so this rocket that they reflew was one of the more recent ones. This one first flew back in April of last year. And so they've had it in their facility since it touched down in April all the way through to today. But they say that they didn't have to do a lot in order to refurbish it to get it ready to fly again. Because there have been other systems that have been able to go back into space after flying there more than once. Most notably was the Space Shuttle, which was designed to fly, orbit the Earth, return to the Earth, and just do that over and over again on a cadence that was supposed to be weeks or months. But it turned out that after each flight, the main engines on the Space Shuttle had to be essentially rebuilt. And so it cost hundreds of millions of dollars to refly the Space Shuttle, and they really didn't end up saving any money in the end. And although SpaceX hasn't been very specific about what they had to fix between the first flight in 2016 and the flight that we had yesterday, they said it was very minimal work. And that their goal within the next year is to have, or by the end of next year, I should say, is to have a model of the Falcon 9 that's capable of flying 10 times with no refurbishment and 100 times with the replacement of some, but not all, of the parts.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is the equivalent. This is, of course, the we've been talking about this concept for feels like years now. This idea that right now all rockets are thrown in the garbage, are burned up on reentry, crash into the ocean or fly away into deep space, and you've lost the expense of this rocket. And that now, for the first time, we've been watching SpaceX move towards this idea of seeing these rockets land again, and we've now got, what is it, half dozen? I'm trying to think how many have actually landed.
More than that, maybe.
Yeah,
even.
10 have landed, and now for the first time, someone got a discount because SpaceX didn't have to throw away tens of millions of dollars on a booster. And in theory, they can do it again.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And now that they've mastered re-landing the rockets, they're expanding the parts of the Falcon 9 that they're trying to reuse. Because yesterday was also the first time that they attempted to recover a piece of the rocket known as the fairing. And the fairing is the part of the rocket that holds the payload inside of it. So you can imagine you have the rocket engine on the bottom, then a huge tower full of rocket fuel, and then sitting on top of that is your satellite, and the metal casing that encloses that's called the fairing. And the fairing is actually a relatively expensive part of the rocket. SpaceX said it costs about $6 million for the fairing. And yesterday, they were able to have that fairing fall away and then be recovered with parachutes that were then picked up by helicopters. And so this is another $6 million of their $85 or so million rocket that they'll be able to reuse in a future flight.
The thing that I find, I'm just going back and forth showing video for people to be able to sort of see. This was a live event, actually, so they broadcast the whole thing live and then put this up there. It was pretty great. Oh, that's so you can see it's landing on the "Of Course I Still Love You" drone ship. But yeah, I'm baffled and amazed and impressed that this happened. And we don't want to give Musk too much free marketing, but congratulations, good job.
Yeah. So their next goal, in addition to continuing to try to land the fairings and reincorporate those into the rocket, is to have a Falcon 9 launch, land, and relaunch again within 24 hours. And they think that'll be accomplishable within the next year. And this, just to kind of put this into context, the original X Prize that kind of launched the whole idea of commercial spaceflight more than a decade ago now, it had a stipulation that you had to fly, land, and fly a rocket again within 2 weeks. And that was seen as nearly impossible with just 10 or 15 years ago. And now we're on the cusp of being able to fly, land, and fly again, not within weeks, but within hours. And once you have that capability, you can really start to expand sort of what you can put into space, because now you can send up a much bigger structure in multiple pieces and then assemble it in orbit without having to wait weeks or months in between launches, or without having to have multiple launch pads available simultaneously.
And we know that United Launch Alliance is now, it looks like, in the past, this was impossible, couldn't be done. Here we are, reused rocket. They are looking to catch up. They're investigating their own methods of doing a reusable rocket. We know, and we're going to be talking about Blue Origins in a second, and they're on their way. We've talked about the New Glenn, which is going to be coming. What 10 years ago was sort of nobody did that. It was kind of a ridiculous idea, and they gave up with the space shuttle being able to reuse a large portion of it. Now it looks like it's like table stakes. Like, if you can't make a reusable rocket, get out.
Yeah, it's amazing how rapidly things have changed. It was just a couple of years ago that Boeing and Lockheed, who combined to form the United Launch Alliance, were openly scoffing at the notion that orbital class rockets would be reusable. And I think they're desperately in catch-up mode at this point. They still have the Atlas V, which is the most reliable U.S. launch vehicle. And so they're not in danger of sort of immediately losing a share of the launch the launch program. But if they don't have something that can be cost competitive against a reusable Falcon 9 in the next 5 years, then they're going to see an increasingly large share of both the commercial and the government launch markets going over to SpaceX, and probably ultimately also to Blue Origin once the New Glenn begins launching in a few years.
Malcolm Bond just posted in the chat that we can add to the space junk, but the key here is that by having a reusable booster, I mean, up until this point, a big chunk of the space junk, the completely uncontrollable junk up there, is spent boosters, spent upper stages, spent fairings. I mean, all that stuff's up there, and now you're getting the fairings back, you're getting the boosters back. We know that figuring out how to get the second stage back is in the future plans, or some kind of single stage to orbit, like the Mars interplanetary transport. So we should be entering an era of hope, a vastly reduced amount of space junk.
Well, and if you have the ability to cheaply put things into orbit, you can start to undertake programs that try to do things like clean up the space junk that's accumulated over the last 65 years of space travel. If you had to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to get something up there to try and do that, that's a tough sell, to a government organization. But if you can do that for tens of millions of dollars, and you can demonstrate that at that cost, you're gaining a substantial benefit, then suddenly these things that seemed very far-fetched, a decade ago, are quite plausible in the coming decade.
Yeah.
And I think we'll see just an incredibly expanded use for what are valuable things to do in low Earth orbit.
Yeah, and that's the whole point, right? Is that when the cost of access goes down, what you're going to be able to use it for rises, and we don't even know what some of the, maybe it's going to be power from space. It's going to be suddenly it's going to be a viable idea to put up solar generators, solar panels up in space to be beaming power back to Earth, or I don't know, attaching a skyscraper to the bottom of an asteroid or something like that. No, that'll never be a really good use of money. Anyway, so I think, I don't want to overstate it, but I feel like this is a historic day. This is a historic day in spaceflight. And obviously, there you go, Elon Musk, more publicity. Yes, we're big fans. And we're going to try and maintain a certain amount of journalistic integrity. So as soon as you screw up, we're watching.
Only half of us here are journalists, so
right. You have no journalistic integrity, just regular integrity, which is probably better. Yeah. All right. Well, we could just rant about this all day, but is this one, from what I've seen, this rocket is now going to go and it's going to become a museum piece, I think. But the next, the next round, there's going to be more reused rockets, and they're probably just going to keep going, as you said, 10 times at least without a major refurbishment, right?
Yeah, and every time that you can use a rocket again without refurbishing it, you just that much more reduce the cost of the next flight. And it's possible to imagine that there'll ultimately be some sort of sliding scale for the price of a Falcon flight, where the later on the rocket has the more times the rocket has flown, the cheaper a price you'll be able to get on it. And so if you have a real experimental payload that you're willing to take a risk on, you can put that on a Falcon that's been flown a bunch of times. And if you're, launching the next mission to Mars or humans to the space station, then you can put that on a brand new rocket where all the pieces are original quality.
Cecil Morgan just put in the chat, there's a link to a 50-minute Musk SES post-launch news conference. So I think that'll be, people are probably going to have a lot of good questions for him. So there might be some really good info in there. All right, let's move on. Let's go on to your next story. I choose NASA has fleshed out the Human Mars program.
Yeah, so about a year ago, NASA announced, they should have kind of just mentioned it, but they made a big deal about announcing that they had sort of made this shift to the idea of putting humans on Mars, and they laid out this multi-decade vision for how that was going to happen. And this vision, sort of the first big milestone that they put out there, was a human orbital mission around Mars in the year 2033. And how exactly that was going to occur was basically left without any details. And what they've done here is they've started to sort of flesh out what those details are going to be. And they put out a timeline for when various things are going to happen and what pieces will be necessary to make this overall mission program possible. And it all relies on the Space Launch System, or the SLS, which is NASA's new ultra heavy lift rocket that will hopefully be flown for the first time in the next couple of years. It was originally slated to fly next year. It's now, or I shouldn't say originally, it's currently slated to fly next year. But there's a lot of questions about whether it might have to slip into 2019 or even 2020. But going on the plan that it flies with an uncrewed capsule in 2018, does one of these loops around the moon to demonstrate that it can boost something to lunar orbit, and also that the human capsule can return from lunar orbit. They'll then be able to start putting infrastructure into space that will enable sort of stepping stones to go to Mars. And they've sort of adopted, I would say, a proposal that people have kind of been dreaming about for decades, which is kind of building a gas station in outer space. And the idea they have is this thing called a deep space gateway. And it would be kind of like a miniature version of the International Space Station, where astronauts could fly there to stage for a longer journey. Could also be a holding place for fuel. It would have a power generating mechanism. And from that, astronauts could assemble, for example, a larger spacecraft that would then be able to make a journey beyond the Earth-Moon system. And to build this deep space gateway, they would need 3 SLS launches between 2023 and 2025. And once that is there and sort of tested out, they would start launching up the actual spacecraft that would make the journey from Earth to Mars. And they're calling this the Deep Space Transport. And the goal is to launch it into lunar orbit by 2027. This is a 41-ton spacecraft, and their renderings show a huge bank of solar panels along with sort of a Apollo-style service module where the astronauts would stay. And then once that is in orbit about the moon and they can get some tests run on it, in 2029, the goal is to launch a set of astronauts to the Deep Space Transport, and they would basically ride in that thing for somewhere between 300 and 400 days, just going around and around and around the moon to prove that, you know, you can live in this thing for the duration of a trip to Mars.
Right.
And if all that goes well, then 4 years later in 2033, that transport would be able to leave lunar orbit and fly to Mars, where they'd make a pass around Mars before returning the crew back to Earth. And so this is the most detailed plan that NASA has offered yet for how they might take practical steps to get from the space station where we are today to an orbital mission to Mars in 2033. But I think it's fair to say that this is an incredibly ambitious plan and a very optimistic schedule.
Right.
Because, you know, we're sitting here in 2017 right now, and the idea that in 6 years NASA will be building a new space station around the moon, that's, I think, stretches believability in the face of the timeline that it took to put together and build parts of the space station, or even the fact that, you know, NASA spent a decade and $40 billion building the Space Launch System and it's yet to fly it.
And potentially, I mean, this is going to cross 4+ administrations. You know, it's going to have to survive the back and, you know, whatever happens politically in the United States from this point forward. It has to survive the impact of the private space industry and what, if they can bring down launch costs, and if they're, if Elon Musk's people are already waiting on the surface of Mars and having lived there for 10 years, when that first fragile flyby goes past, it's going to look a little funny.
Yeah, if I had to speculate about the motivations of NASA putting this plan together, it would be that if they can get this deep space gateway up in orbit about the moon relatively soon, then that gives them sort of a big physical asset out there that makes it more difficult to change directions again. Because once you sort of have this first piece built and up in space, then if you want to change directions, you basically have to throw that away.
Yeah, I mean, I think the direction makes a lot of sense, right? Which is that, it's back to that incremental idea that you move forward, building larger and larger capabilities, putting more of this hardware in space that still gives you more flexibility. And if in 2027 they decide that they're not going to go to Mars, but they do want to go to an asteroid, or they want to spend more time being able to send people to the moon and things like that, you've got that, it's not that difficult to repurpose this technology to have that capability. You're definitely not, all this infrastructure is not going to be there to go around and around and around the Earth. It's to push out further into the solar system, but you've still got some flexibility about exactly where it is that you are going.
Right, but if you get that first bit out, that at least gives you a stepping stone to guide your technology development going forward. Because what we've seen now is that all of these various ideas are batted around on the Earth, never even make it to the cutting of metal and welding of parts stage. And then if it's just ideas, that's very easy for another NASA administrator or a future president to come along and say, no, we're going to go in a different direction.
Right.
But if you've taken this first step, then that at least gives you some direction to start with, and then how you branch off from there is still flexible.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I don't know. Like, what's your gut tell you, man?
I mean, it's hard to say that this is going to happen, given the history of these ideas. If this is going to happen, we'll know relatively soon, because the Trump administration is going to have to put, and Congress is going to have to put substantial resources behind this project in the next, 18 to 24 months.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't happen, then no matter what words are coming out of their mouth, this isn't going to come together, at least on the timeline that they've proposed. And so I think right now, odds are not great that this actually happens. But if we see Congress appropriate, several $1 billion for this project in next year's budget, then it's something to take a little bit more seriously, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, there are similar plans, I'm sure, worked up in China that have a sort of similar kinds of technology and gear and milestones. I mean, the Chinese have already sent a spacecraft around the moon. They've landed a lander on the moon. Their plans, they put up a new space station. So there's, their plans are in that same path. And then you've got the plans for what SpaceX is going to be doing, as well as other potential private organizations. So I think 20 years ago, when we heard someone say, now it's time for us to, when George W.H. Bush said, we're going to go to Mars, how much is that going to cost? And someone came back and said, it's going to cost $500 billion. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. And then, let me see if I recall all the different ways my heart was broken. And then I don't think Clinton had anything, but then George W. Bush said that they were going to be going back to the moon. And then
Constellation.
Right, with Constellation. And Obama said that they're going to be going to an asteroid. And that's been pretty clearly canceled.
That's been canceled. Budget request for this year.
Yeah, exactly. So that's not going to happen. So now, so we're like 3 canceled projects so far, and now, so for me, of course, as a Canadian, I neither voted nor pay taxes to NASA, but You know, like if it happens, that'd be awesome. Like, you've got my support. I will clap when it happens, and I think that'll be great. And at the same time, I think there's enough other paths where this could happen that I don't feel like it's going to be taking away it's going to be ruining sci-fi Christmas, you know?
Yeah, I think that the way this is going to happen, when and if it ultimately does happen, is it's going to have to be a substantial commitment by a president in their first-ish year of office for a president that ultimately has a two-term stay in the White House. Because because 7 years is enough time to build that inertia that ensures that it can continue past a presidential transition. I mean, we saw Kennedy early in his presidency pitch the Apollo program, and that program built so quickly and with so much inertia that it survived his assassination and the Johnson presidency, and it survived into the Nixon presidency before actually the first Apollo astronauts set foot on the moon. And it was because so much had already been built and so much had already been flown. And so if you see a president, in their first year or two of office, commit substantial resources to do this and make progress in their 8 years, then there's a good chance. But if a president waits to their second or third year, or absolutely if they wait until after they're reelected, then whatever that direction is going to get changed.
Yeah. I mean, the good sign is that, with the current administration, is that they have made a lot of the right signs, have said that they're deeply invested in, and I think they want that to be part of their legacy, as they helped humans explore the solar system. So that's moving in the right direction. I mean, we've done some reporting over on Universe Today about where we're at in the Trump administration and their support for that aspect of NASA. Everything else gets cut, but there could more pushing out towards humans in space. So we'll see what happens.
In DC, it ultimately comes down to where you put your money.
Yeah.
Words are free. Yeah. And plenty of members of Congress and the president and the president's staff, NASA administrators will, say grand things about various possibilities. But if they're not putting money in those directions, they're not really serious about doing that. And so if you see a multi-billion-dollar appropriation for one of these pieces of the project, that's when you start to believe, yes, this might actually be able to happen.
We are so jaded. but hey,
realistic, Fraser.
We are realistic. We are so realistic. We will help just bring it all back to an even keel. Of course, after we just frothed about SpaceX. But anyway, so let's move on. Hey, here's another rocket company that's doing some interesting things. Check it out.
Yeah, so you might be able to, you might not be able to become an astronaut. We saw NASA get, more than 17,000 applications for what's ultimately expected to be 6 or 8 astronaut spots. But if you happen to be extremely rich, that might not stop you from being able to go up to the edge of space. And that might not even stop you from going to the edge of space next year, because Blue Origin has been sort of on a tear, but in a different direction than the way SpaceX has gone. SpaceX is focused on orbital launches for NASA, for commercial partners, thinking about stepping farther out to go to Mars. And Blue Origin, headed by Amazon.com CEO Jeff Bezos, has been thinking about, okay, where's the money right now? And their idea is that the quickest, fastest source of money is to start selling rocket trips to space to rich people. And they haven't said anything about the pricing for these, but it's expected to sort of be in the neighborhood of a couple $100,000 US, which, while a tremendous amount of money, is peanuts compared to the tens of millions of dollars that Russia has been willing to sell spaces on the International Space Station to wealthy people. So you're talking about lowering the access to weightlessness by a factor of 100. The trade-off is you're only going to get a few minutes of weightlessness. And so you want to make those few minutes count. And one way to be able to do that is to make it just gorgeous to look at the curvature of the Earth, because you're not going to get out and really sort of be amongst the Earth and the Moon and the stars, but you'll get a view that very few people have ever gotten, which is to be able to see the Earth curving away under you.
Yeah.
And that's why the design unveiled this week by Blue Origin for the capsule that'll ride on the New Shepard spacecraft makes so much sense, because it has a series of just enormous windows. I mean, these things make the windows on airplanes look just absolutely minuscule. And it's a series of sort of ejection seat looking things that you'll ride up in the basically 10-minute flight up to the edge of space. And then you'll be able to unbuckle and spend a few minutes floating around in the capsule and looking back at the Earth through these enormous windows. And their goal is still to make this happen next year. And so if that's true, then these renders ought to be turned into actual physical hardware relatively soon. Because you can imagine they're going to want to do a whole series of test flights before they risk putting paying customers on top of their rocket.
And this is one of those ways that's always been described as the way you're going to fund human private space flight, is start with space tourism and go from there. But even as we've seen with Virgin Galactic, getting a profitable space tourism agency off the ground is a complicated and expensive and kind of dangerous affair. So you got to get this right. You got to show that safety is happening, and it seems like a hard way to make money.
Yeah, I mean, rockets today are about as safe as airplanes were, like in their first decade or so of invention. But we saw that the air travel industry rapidly got dramatically safer, to the point today where there's no safer way to get from point A to point B on Earth than getting in an airplane. And I think that if space tourism is really going to become a viable thing, they're going to need to be showing that same progress towards safety, and they're going to have to figure out how to weather the inevitable accidents that happen. Yeah. Because back in 1903, there was no Twitter tweeting out, "Hey, this guy just died when his airplane crashed." But when you see just pictures of fireballs on Instagram for there were space tourists in there, that's going to put a cap on their market really
it's like
quickly.
If 1 in 20 roller coasters burst into flames, would you get on the car?
And even if you would, is the government going to allow them to fly with that kind of safety record? I think this is the big unanswered question is, if they have an accident in their first 100 flights, is the government going to be satisfied with that safety record? I mean, and basically no rockets are more safe than an accident every 100 flights.
Right. And Larry Beckham said, so New Shepard is the cash cow to finance New Glenn. New Glenn is the competitor to the SpaceX Falcon Heavy, really. And and I don't know if that's the case. I mean, it feels to me like it's more about testing and showing the viability and safety of this launch system more than it being a revenue stream. I think the better revenue stream is to build that massive rocket, launch satellites into space, and make tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars per launch. I mean, that seems to be a more viable business model than trying to take meat into space briefly.
Yeah, a handful of space tourists are only going to give you, say, $1 million of absolute revenue for any given flight. And if you start subtracting the cost of the fuel and the cost of maintenance and the cost of operating the spaceport and the insurance and all of that, I mean, they're still probably going to be making money. But you don't finance massive rocket development with a couple $100,000 of profit for every 5 or 6 space tourists that you can convince to go into space.
All right. Well, by all means, let us know what you think. I look forward to your comments in the chat. Would you go to space on Blue Origin, or are you happy to let other people try it first.
I mean, fortunately, that $200,000 is going to keep me and probably a lot of our viewers from having to make that decision right away.
Yeah, exactly.
Would you go?
House? No way.
Well, not for 200 grand, but if say it was
free,
no.
say
it was. Okay.
Nope, not yet. I think we've really narrowed in my lack of bravery when it comes to sacrificing myself for moving space exploration forward. I applaud anyone who's willing to do it, but I am not ready to take that kind of risk. And fortunately, I don't have to. There isn't, if the list of volunteers finally reaches me, then I'll consider it. But there are hundreds of thousands of people ahead of me who would be glad to do it. I mean, we just went to the roller coaster park, and I was getting sick after, half a day at Six Flags. I'm like, oh, this is no way. And like when people see this, like when you're floating around inside this capsule, you kind of imagine like, oh, I'm feeling the force of gravity, but I'm moving around, like the way your mind imagines it. But anyone who's been has done like a 0G flight, or anyone who has been on a really horrible roller coaster, imagine the roller coaster where the drop is so fast that you come out of your seat, and then you had that feeling for 10 straight minutes. Or for a full year.
How romantic is your view of Earth going to be when you're surrounded by the vomit globules of your crewmates?
Will they all have vomit bags and just spend half their time vomiting and the other half screaming? I don't know.
That'd be a disappointing use of $200,000 if you just sat there convulsing for 10 minutes and you never got to look out at the window.
Most expensive vomit ever.
If you're going to do that, you might as well go drink some good whiskey.
All right, we better wrap this up. Morgan, thanks so much for joining us this week and making it the Fraser and Morgan Show. Where do people find out more?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Morgan Renberg. You can check out my website, morganrenberg.com. And take a moment to plug a new project that I've been working on, which is called Chart Your World. And it makes beautiful visualizations for really important government and international data sets. So if you wanted to see how the cost of space or of air travel has dropped over time, or what degrees have the largest gender imbalance, or who's spending the most money on healthcare or education, then go over to chartyourworld.org or follow our Twitter account at chartyourworld, and love to get your feedback. We're trying to sort of make it possible to engage in these really important conversations with some actual facts behind them. Make it real easy to get and share that information, and love to know what you think.
That is so cool. I'm really excited about that. I'm totally going to check it out. I had no idea that you worked on that project, so thanks. Big thank you, of course, to the Weekly Space Hangout crew. Go to wshcrew.space. They're the chat down here. And you could, if you want to participate in that chat, just go to their website, totally free, sign up, and then you get into our Slack, and then I'm in there. Many of the people on the team is in there. Pamela's in there. You can hang out with us. So if you want to take your fandom of what we're doing to the next level, go ahead and join us at the WSH crew. One thing, we're probably going to be doing an interview offline. I've got somebody who can't show up live, but is super cool, that I'm going to have to interview offline. So we might, for a future episode, we're just going to run the interview ahead of time. So I just want to see if you guys are all cool with that. We've never done that before, but we'll give it a shot. All right. Well, thanks to our guests. Thanks to Morgan. Thanks to everyone from the WSH crew. We will see you at Astronomy Cast in 22 minutes over on the Astronomy Cast channel, episode 444. Fractals. And otherwise, we will see you all next week. Let's go back to there we go. You can wave again. All right. See you, everybody.